Well, we have about 40 minutes for discussion, questions. So who wants to start? Do we have some microphones in the room? Okay, I see two hands over here, one in this corner, the other one is back. Introduce yourself. Yes, it's on. Keep your question brief.
My name is Chandra Randade. I'm retired from the World Bank. I have a question to all of you, is about energy. Without a reliable supply of electricity, in particular rural electricity, agribusiness may not grow as rapidly as we want. And if you compare Africa with China and USA, I think the major success stories on electrification in the US definitely, and in particular rural electric cooperatives. So the question is that IFPRI and other organizations, and including the World Bank, are we doing any research on effect of electrification on agribusiness, first one. And the second thing is that we are talking too much about rural roads to talk more about electricity.
Thank you. Maybe we can group several questions together. Okay, the one back in the corner there. One there. Derek, did you have a question, or you just help us to hold the microphone? Okay, why don't you go ahead, using the advantage of having it.
Okay. Derek Biley, and very much appreciate the presentations. And I guess, Candy, your vision of exporting chocolate to China. I'd just like to ask you a bit about, I would guess that one of your big challenges there will be that China probably has a significant duty on chocolate, but probably doesn't have a duty on cocoa. And you haven't mentioned the whole getting a level playing field, etc., at the global level as one of the ingredients of agribusiness success in Africa. And related to that, I think it's important to look for value added, but I think this commodity, there's a lot of money to be made in agribusiness from commodities. And countries like Brazil, Southeast Asia with palm oil, have made, without adding much value, have very substantially increased their exports. In fact, Southeast Asia exports more palm oil than the value of all sub-Saharan African agricultural exports. And that's an African crop. So,
thank you, Derek. I think, I really have to go back to you. Let's start this side, and then we move to the right side.
Thank you. My name is Tang Xiaoyang, and I'm from IFPRI. My question is about actually, the agri-business, that's the direction. But how can we reach that? I'm thinking about the contrast between smallholder farmers and also then the big companies. Because all these pillars and the approaches you mentioned, I can see like, for example, the business mind or this technology, the big companies, they have the advantage, and they can be so in my mind, then if the African countries, they want to develop agribusiness, then they cooperate with these bigger companies, multinational companies. It will be the fastest way. While for a lot of smallholder farmers, then it will take a long time to really teach them this business orientation. But however, the problem is if we have this introduce these big companies to develop the agribusiness, then how about these smallholder farmers? Because in Africa, almost all these countries, the smallholder farmers, they are the majority. And with this agribusiness, what's the effect on them? Maybe they will be affected, and in a lot of cases, actually these smallholder farmers, they suffer a lot from this agribusiness.
Yeah. Well, the next one, I think the lady next to you had a... Yeah, then we come back to you. Yeah, go ahead.
My name is Teija Reyes. I'm from American University. I would like to ask about what are the plans to do for encouraging women in agribusiness in Africa. There are more and more female-headed households, and so they should get access to farmers' cooperations, and they should be involved in decision making, and there are many cultural hindrances for that. So I wanted to ask also the land tenure issue, like we heard. And for my experience, only female professionals can work effectively with women, at least in some areas in Africa. What are the plans to do for encouraging women?
Well, thank you. So electricity, export tax, tariffs, and smallholders, and gender.
Thank you for it. Back in September in South Africa, wages of colleagues Jamal Sagir, VJI, Access Conference for the Energy Ministers, a declaration. At the same time, same 2 days, we had the agriculture ministers in another room. Again, for us, it's the nexus, this connection. Agribusiness, energy, food security, water security, and energy security. So there's work already going on, but we emphasize again the critical energy systems, these bottom-up solutions with the advantage of renewables. Again, some of these solutions are there in India, China, using biomass gasification technology. We know they exist. And so, in fact, we're working with the World Bank. Again, this linkage, energy security, food security, and water. Remember, some of the renewable energy technologies are also tested. That is something we're looking at as well. Water as well. Tariff escalation we covered in the book, Derek. We covered tariff escalation.
Oh, sorry. We covered tariff escalation in the book. We do know that it's, even with the EU, anything but arms, commodities can go in. You add value, immediately the tariffs jump. It's a disincentive. We cover rules of origin. In some cases, AGOA has been good for Africa, for garments, because there is a little bit of flexibility on rules of origin. In fact, we covered that a lot with Paul Collier in 2009. If you're looking at industrialization, how can countries specialize in different parts of the value chain? The old production system is that you produce the whole thing. But in a number of industrial processes, you can specialize in components. That we've covered. But very true, the issue of tariff escalation, whether in China or in EU or in India, is a major issue. The incentives are for commodities. Oil palm, it's a story I like. As we speak right now, one of our colleagues, Bukanga, he used to be at IITA. Bukanga is in Malaysia, doing a joint conference with the Palm Oil Board. I say this because I get questions from NGOs, oh, you're promoting palm oil. I say, well, what can I do? That's what is natural in my village. That's what we eat. It's there wild. What we are saying, we want to tame it. We want to grow it sustainably, but commercial. Now, as Africans are discouraged from doing it, it's flourishing in Asia, but also, let me tell you a story. 3 years ago, I visited President IFPRI in Colombia. And he said, I'll give you my oil palm strategy. We're going to do it in the Northwest. I said, palm oil in Colombia? He said, yes. Similar ecology. And we're doing it for bioenergy and social inclusion. I can't get people off drugs, but I think this one is going to pay them good cash. They will leave those drugs. So my point is, Africa cannot run away from its traditional crops that others are commercializing and industrializing because they fear climate. It is a presumption that Africans are not capable to do it sustainably. The more we keep away, others are doing it. Jatropha. Prime Minister Meles 2 weeks ago told me he's already made a decision on the barren lands where they cannot grow corn or rice or wheat. And then you get the flooding, the topsoil goes, he has to cover them. He's going to use a bioenergy crop. Cover the land, but at the same time get resources. On partnerships, indeed, partnerships with big corporations will be important. I just signed a second MOU with the Metro Group, the third largest retailer in the world, again, just for agribusiness. They saw programs we've done in Egypt 2 years ago. They signed with us to connect farmers to the value chain to supply their supermarkets. But some of the ideas, I have to tell you, I borrowed from Tom Reardon and IFPRI, because they've done some work in India and China. What Reliance and other private companies have done to take services to rural areas, for example, in the dairy sector, where government cannot go, but they need those supplies for their supermarkets. And Lonro is trying to do the same thing in Southern Africa. So I do agree that some of these partnerships with larger corporations will be important. Women. My last comment here is, it's obvious, especially for us in West Africa, 80% of food processing is done by women. I say with some of the gender groups, I say you always talk about the barriers. Let's talk about a cultural positive in West Africa, where for us it's automatic. Women process, women sell. How do you take that cultural positive and scale it up and give them the resources and inputs they need in the agribusiness chain? They do 80% of the processing and marketing of food. That's a positive. Don't focus only on the negative. How do you build on the positive to move forward?
Thank you, Kande. John, Patrick, and Jerry, do you want to add anything to what Kande has said? Very briefly.
Yeah, let me just add.
We should press the button. Make sure it's green.
Okay, yes. Concrete plans. I had the Nigerian the UNIDO office in West Africa, and your suggestion that only professional women's group can do it better, it's true. We are working with the UN Women, which has the mandate to promote economic empowerment of women, and we are developing a major program for women entrepreneurship, focusing on value addition, just as the DG explained. And that model will take over to other African countries. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, let's start from the right side. We have two ladies here and then two gentlemen here. How about that? Where's the microphones? Oh, yes, there's another distinguished gentleman in between. Do we have the microphone somewhere? Oh, okay, so you have an advantage of having the microphone here. Why don't you go ahead and start?
Richard America from Georgetown University Business School. You mentioned the pillars. The first pillar, the missing pillar, is management. Africa's main problem is weak management. All the issues we're discussing come down to poor management. Creating good business schools in Africa, therefore, is required. The United Nations, corporations, foundations, the World Bank, U.S. government, 100 good accredited business schools in the next 20 years, and these problems would be well on their way to solution.
Okay, management. Okay, come back to the front here. I think we have three in a row. Why don't you just go ahead to...
Just send it right down. This is for Kande. This is a question about what you think are the most effective ways to build nutrition improvement into the strategies for agribusiness development within the value chain. Well, it's a very, very
Great
important...
point. Okay.
Yeah.
All right, next.
I'm Jackie Ignatova at the University of Maryland, and I was wondering about how you see the role of GMOs in agribusiness development. In particular, I was interested in the transfer of knowledge and how to facilitate this and how to get around, either deal with existing patents or like concerns regarding property rights and how that knowledge can be shared. Thank you.
Okay, John.
Thank you. I'm John Miller. I was at IFPRI before most of you were born, I think. Roughly. I hesitate.
I wish we were that young.
I think it's in this presentation was that we should have a shift of resources towards the agribusiness sector. The last speaker, of course, talked about the importance of increasing agricultural productivity, and I want to enlarge on that in a moment. I think we've had a couple of, and I want to be very clear, I agree entirely with the statements about where the effective demand is going to be growing. Of course, agribusiness sector expanding rapidly. The question is how you do that. I have two comments to make here. Number one, we've had a very big experiment on this. U.S. foreign assistance over the last 20 years has pretty much gotten out of concern with the farm side production and emphasized almost entirely the agribusiness side. And I don't think the results have been very encouraging. I'll give two examples, one very small. In Afghanistan, U.S. aid makes a big thing of the huge agribusiness success in apples, apple marketing and so on. Well, what they've done is had a very small increase in apple marketing in the areas in which they succeeded in doing this, they got ahead of the production, and the result was that the apples that were being processed and exported to India were coming out of the Afghan market and being replaced by imports from Pakistan because apple production was not increasing. Now, implicit in most of this agribusiness effort in USA, and I don't want to for a moment think that I don't believe that they understand this, but implicit in their position is if you get the agribusiness sector going, that's going to create increased demand for the agricultural sector. That will push up prices, and then the price increases will bring about the increased production. Well, we've known for a long time that that's not likely to be true, and we've just had a massive experiment in India on that. You've had demand for the horticulture and the livestock sector growing at somewhere between 7 and 8% per year. We've seen production increasing at most at about 60% that rate. Well, now, that means if you round the 60% to 50% so I can do the arithmetic on it, that means the agribusiness sector in the parts of agriculture that are most promising from that point of view has been expanding about half as rapidly as it could have been. Well, if you lose half your growth because you're not doing the job on the productivity side, that's a pretty serious problem. And it's an argument against shifting resources away from the production side and into the agribusiness side. One final comment on that. The examples of successes, by the way, Brazil, they've done a tremendous job of institutionalizing the process of increasing agricultural productivity, especially through Embrapa and so on. Thailand and Malaysia have also done pretty well on that. When I deal in countries such as Afghanistan or India or Nepal, what I constantly find when I talk to the agribusiness people, that their number one problem is getting an adequate quantity of adequate quality of product. That's an on-farm problem.
Right. John, thank you. I think this problem is well stated. Yes. Okay, there's two gentlemen there.
David Schiffer from the Partnership to Cut Hunger and Poverty in Africa. I browsed quickly through the book and I plan to go through it more thoroughly, but public policy seems to be the most important thing, what the government is actually doing. And in that respect, I was just wondering, from the research that you've actually done for this book, which countries in Africa which governments in Africa have been adequately or at best positioning themselves to promote agribusiness development in conjunction with both the private sector? If that's possible.
Thank you. Last one.
My name is Innocent. I'm a fellow with the UN Foundation. My question is tied to public policy as well. I just wanted to ask to what extent are national governments and policymakers willing to use or adopt energy access initiatives as part of their agricultural agribusiness development strategy?
Okay, thank you. So the management, nutrition, the productivity increase versus the agribusiness, whether there is a competition, the role of public policy, and very contentious issues on GMO. Who wants to start? Maybe John, you could start with it's a productivity issue. GMO, you also mentioned about a GMO in your presentation.
Well, let me start with John Miller's question, since I studied at his knee years ago, even before he was at IFPRI. I agree entirely with what you say. I think what and maybe that was a mistake in the presentation, but not, I don't think, in the book. The point we try to make is that you can't dissociate agricultural productivity and agribusiness. That this whole issue of quantity at quality is absolutely big constraint, and the whole structural transformation is a transformation of that whole system. So you need to be doing exactly what you say. So I agree with that. In terms of the GMOs, I think I'll let Patrick and others get into that, but let me just say a couple of things about that. One, GMOs are in Africa. if you don't have a biosafety protocol, it's still going to be there. If I do work in Mali, Burkina is growing BT cotton, and anybody who believes those seeds aren't crossing the border is just blind. So the question is, how do you set up the biosafety protocols, and then can you segregate if you're going to try to export into markets that have concerns about that, particularly the EU?
But before I ask Patrick to deal with the management and the public policy issues, Jerry, do you want to say something about the impact of the palm oil production that's in Indonesia, Malaysia? Well, the palm oil actually are expanding to native forestry, not just from their original production area, and that there is evidence to show that the palm oil production actually has the least impact, or net impact on climate change. In fact, the negative impact is quite a big. I mean, just from my own reading, some of the studies from Minnesota clearly shows that the palm oil production has one of the largest carbon emission than anything else.
I would guess what you're referring to, although I don't want to know that I want to put words in your mouth, is the palm oil production on peatlands in Indonesia, where you've got these deep peat soils that, as they drain the soil to grow the palm, you get the peat breaking down, you get CO2 emissions. And it turns out that you actually also, as part of the whole peat production, get a lot of nitrous oxide emissions from the added nitrogen that you put on. Now palm is a pretty darn good plant in terms of converting solar energy into useful energy, in the sense of an oil product. But I do have a chapter in a book on biofuels, actually, that's called "Are Biofuels the Best Use of Sunlight?" And anytime you have a chapter titled a rhetorical question in it, the answer is typically no. And that's certainly what I would argue as well, that we're misplacing a lot of resources and investing in biofuels because, first of all, technically plants are really bad at converting sunlight into useful energy. The chlorophyll only operates on a couple of frequencies, spectral frequencies, so all that other energy coming out of the sun is wasted. In any case, they only operate when the sun, when it's warm enough that they can grow, and so there's big parts of the temperate calendar which you get no production out of biofuels, but you could do quite well with photovoltaics. Commercial photovoltaics these days are more effective in terms of converting sunlight into useful energy than plants ever will be. And so to come back to the reliable energy question here, photovoltaics are already to a point where they can provide reliable energy. The issue is storage and battery technologies, thanks to all the cell phones in the room and computers and laptops. The battery technology is advancing at tremendous speeds in terms of its efficiency and energy density. So not this year and not next year and then not in 5 years, but perhaps in 10 years from now, the reliable energy in the countryside will not come from biofuels. It'll come from photovoltaics and batteries, and not from generated electricity running along large power grids.
Well, thank you, Jerry. Patrick, do you want to address the role of public policy, probably the role of government, in addition to what we have already discussed, electricity, roads, better regulation, trade policies? But what are the additional public policy? I don't know what you mean, additional public policy, or even the role of government in promoting agribusiness.
Yes. Role of government, I think it's very, very critical if African countries have to shift from a smallholder production-focused agriculture to an agribusiness agriculture, to an agribusiness sector. One, the government is the one that sets the rules, the laws, the trade laws. It's the government that puts in place incentive structures for farmers to either have access to productivity increasing inputs. It's the government that improves access to markets. So if these are not in place, if laws and structures and institutions are not in place, of course, the agribusiness we are talking about will not happen. So government is very, very important in terms of facilitating agribusiness in agribusinesses, in terms of facilitating investment from the private sector. So whatever incentives that you give in other sectors, be it in energy, be it in infrastructure programs, need to be linked with agribusiness development. There's no need to develop a road or build a bridge if people are not going to pay for it. There's no need to put the electricity in place if people are not going to get incomes, jobs, to be able to pay for it. And these are the kind of mismatch in the policies we've had in Africa before. You develop roads, and then there's no productive activity along those roads. What happens is that you have tomato rotting on the roads because we didn't put in place a processing facility to mop out the excess products from around that vicinity to produce it into a value-added product that can be shifted and stored over the 1 year period, so that hunger and famine doesn't persist in the on the continent. So public policy for us is very important.
Okay,
your question on countries that are positioning themselves, from our analysis, you can look at the case for Kenya. I mean, it's well explained. Look at page 176. There's a box 6.6 that will give you some indication
Petra,
on that.
I suggest maybe you can get a free copy of the book there. It's there. So you read that chapter. You know, IFPRI is also doing another work related to agribusiness supply chains. I remember when I was in Ghana about a year ago, I attended a workshop about the tomato chain. Shashi, do you want to tell us the real story there? This is exactly the same problem John Mannon mentioned for Afghanistan, Pakistan. I think that tomato chain story is very exciting, very, very interesting from the production side, the processing side, and the role of the government. Sometimes too much role actually is very harmful. You know, they try to push this ideology, oh, we got to push nationalization of supply chains. But well, let me ask maybe Shashi to say a little bit about that work, then I will let John to respond. Shashi.
I think the audience has come to an agreement already that the productivity is key. And that's what we are finding. I mean, in Ghana, they've been trying to process tomatoes since Nkrumah's days, and they haven't succeeded. They've invited large corporations. The problem is low productivity. In effect, farmers want higher prices from demand. What processors want is a lower priced tomato. So in effect, what you really need to do is to increase productivity in order to sustain any kind of agribusiness. The major problem with agribusiness at least in Ghana, is really supply. Peanuts are not locally processed, they're imported and processed. Cassava. So it is getting the supply is more of a problem, that the whole notion of mopping up surpluses is not really likely to work. But what is more dangerous in this is that as the incomes are increasing, urbanization takes place, and people are demanding more and more processed food, in effect your local growers are losing the market to imports. Because you cannot compete in the processed market. So the whole idea is you not only Africa is disadvantaged, and I mean I'm generalizing from Ghana, by lower productivity as well as higher infrastructure costs. Unless you get both, you're going to lose demand for agricultural fresh products as well. Going back to the cocoa story, that's not a pleasant one either. In fact, the Chinese have negotiated for a supply of 30,000 tons of cocoa beans annually in exchange for building a dam. And Ghana has a processing capacity of nearly 500,000 tons. Ghana produces 900,000 tons, but what is processed locally is only about 150 million tons. What the processors want is they want government of Ghana, which earns about 4 or 5% premium in the global market, to sell beans at a 20% discount locally for processing. And processing creates no jobs, after all, none of the processing industries. So in effect, that is a major argument going on between the multinationals that are in there, and the government says, we will not give it to you at a discount, whereas the processors are through the World Bank pushing the government to sell them beans at a discount, and the government doesn't see any sense in selling that. But what is processed in Ghana is only intermediate product. What is processed into chocolates is only about 20 or 30,000 tons. You can't produce chocolates because then it requires milk, it requires sugar, it requires power. Everything is expensive.
Yeah.
More expensive.
Okay. John, and then Kanda.
Just one point on the policy. I think often in Africa we think too much in terms of national policy, and one of the challenges is there are too many national borders. And if you're going to try to operate at scale, you can't have different standards across all these countries. Nobody wants to invest if you have to meet 54 different regulatory sets of rules. So trying to push what Jerry was talking about in terms of regional integration, it's very tough, but it's very important in terms of regulatory standards. It's would make a big difference where you invest. If you think about production and consumption basins as going across national borders versus within national borders, and to think really outside the box, think about the potential for regional justice systems, because one of the big problems is contract enforcement. And if we're in a small country, and Jerry's my cousin, and this is my brother-in-law, and I'm director of customs, and he wants to import steel, it's very hard for me to give him not to give him a break. But if you are the judge and you're from outside our domain, perhaps something along those lines could lead to dealing with what is essentially a small country problem with regard to enforcement.
Kande?
I think one of the comments I want to react to is the one from John Mello as well about the policy swings. For us, that's part of the problem too, inconsistency in the policy. 1 minute we're supporting production, then we shift probably a whole decade supporting something different. It is to maintain that consistency, and I think in the book we argue about, again, the integration and the holistic approach, that it's not only marketing, it is production and marketing and the supply chain. And that's where we spend quite a bit of time on productivity enhancement and the use of modern inputs into the African agriculture. So we want some consistency and clear direction over time, rather than these ad hoc shifts every 5 or so years. I wanted to comment also on GMO. The GMO story for Africa is also connected to trade. I know this because we've been in some discussions on it 4 years ago, that in fact some African countries would like to adopt GMOs, but yes, they don't have the safety mechanisms and protocols in place. However, a bigger disincentive is their biggest market is in Europe. So they don't have systems yet to say, fine, we will segregate the GMO from the non-GMO. And they know they're under a lot of threats saying, hey, if you go GMO, you won't sell here. So again, it's partly linked to the trade arrangements. And so I'll give you an anecdote, which is interesting. Junior Bush told one of my colleagues, asked him in Canada in one of the G8 meetings, how come you Africans are resisting GMO food? You need it in Southern Africa. This was a time when they had the drought. And the colleague explained everything we've said here. And he said, but I'm told that you're worried about being Frankenstein. I've been eating it since I was born. Look at me. So you need it? We have it. We can help you supply corn now so you deal with the famine. But yeah, there are also some myths about GMO in Africa, but also the worry that, look, if you don't have the right seed multiplication and supply system, what if their local germplasms disappear? That's also a major fear in Africa about using GMOs. What happens with their own indigenous varieties and who will be supplying? Then suddenly they're dependent on inputs that are imported, seeds.
All right, thank you. Any last burning questions? I know Suresh, okay, Patricia? Nutrition, sorry, Patricia, it doesn't only go to nutrition, okay. Yeah, nutrition, yeah. But you have my heart on it, so they don't need to answer. Okay, what about, yes, or somebody online? Good, okay, go ahead.
We have a question from Laura P18 on Twitter. She says, how can there be comparative advantage
with the current regime of subsidies in agriculture?
In Africa or
Agriculture.
in Europe? Yeah, elsewhere, to compete with Africans. Yes. Okay, maybe let's wait for a while. Suresh, keep it short. As short as what just Simon
Yeah, I mean, we are talking about structural transformation. Any kind of, my name is Suresh Babu from IFPRI. Any kind of transformation requires corresponding level of capacity, and I'm glad the speakers brought that out. And I want to also caution you that we all talk about that as one more slide in capacity and go home. I wanted to push you in that direction of give us a strategy to develop agribusiness capacity in Africa. And we have been thinking about it for the past 20 years. Even with the liberalization, with the market liberalization in grain trade, we liberalized and there is no capacity to procure grains and to sell grains in the places where it was needed. And that was a big disaster in Southern Africa, at least where I was living there at the time. So give us a strategy for developing agribusiness capacity in Africa if you are going to transform from production to agribusiness. Thank you.
Yeah, capacity. All right. Emma. Probably there will be the last to the next. Okay, you will be the last.
Since we have the privilege of having a DG of a major UN organization here at the table, I just can't resist. Because it seems to me we've talked a lot about integration and about mismatches between sort of emphasis on this strategy or that strategy. And it seems to me that the UN system, the international development support organizations themselves have a role to play here. Are you confident that, in fact, the kinds of messages that you're talking about, the kind of dream that you've just outlined for Africa, is actually shared by your fellow UN agencies? I know IFAD, of course, Kanayo is very strong about talking about.
By the way, he wrote a foreword for that book.
Okay. I didn't read it yet, so. But we've also talked about the WHO and the WTO and the World Bank and the regional banks all having roles here to play. So just a word from you on sort of how you're providing either collaboration or leadership or whatever in this sort of domain of multilateral organizations.
Okay. Great, thank you. Now, the last question. It's working?
Yeah, it's working. My question is, in order for agribusiness to succeed in Africa, marketing and trade is one big aspect of it, regional trade between African countries, East, West, but there is one big limitation of infrastructure. It's very complicated, to transport anything within Africa, like from Nigeria to Tanzania, Kenya. What is the strategy on making infrastructure, especially transportation network, help out in this developing agribusiness?
Okay, well, thank you. So here, how subsidies in US and Europe affects African agriculture competitive advantage, I think probably more related to processed agriculture products. Capacity is a big word, keep talking, but never move to actual implementation. Then how you, as a UN organization's head, how the UN can work together. Nutrition.
We all dodged the nutrition question.
I don't think the infrastructure is very important. I think if you can touch it, that's fine. Otherwise, we can always park it somewhere as how we are going to do it.
Let me start with the easy one. For sure, UN collaboration is going to be crucial. Kanayo and Wenzi, myself, we share the same view. And in fact, we collaborated with him and also FAO to do for the African Development Bank what we call 3ADI, African Agribusiness, Agriculture and Agribusiness Development Strategy, which the EU and others are adopting. But Kanayo, he's helped us with the message that commercialization is good for small farmers as well. So that's his angle, pushing that for us. So we're collaborating. But the hope I see here is that we're going to have a Brazilian heading FAO. So from the successes of Embrapa in the productivity side in Brazil, all the way to looking at the supply chain, we see now that we're going to have somebody from an emerging economy that you don't have to convince about agribusiness. So we see an opportunity here for even greater collaboration. The other issue here, to link it with the capacity building, to my knowledge, till today, the biggest supporter of agribusiness questions in Africa is USAID. Other donors, no. And the sad news is that you get monies in donor funding to do the studies about the potential of this, potential of that in Africa. We do all of this. Then you come back now and say, okay, here are the recommendations. We need the real cash to do that capacity building and demonstration and linkages. No money. You could get money later on to reassess why it didn't happen. So for me, that's why the partnership for 3 years now with Canayo said, hey, my friend, you get the money for rural development. Part of your rural development strategy has to be part of those infrastructure we need. Yeah, the cold chains and so on. You know, I need FAO with me, so we join a message on agro-industry development. So we're building it so that we can affect donor funding. Because right now the money is for the studies. Only USAID seems to have the appetite over time to look at the marketing and other aspects of agribusiness, but again, not enough cash. So the role they can play in getting donors around the table to say, look, investing in agribusiness is also women's empowerment. It's also about food security and also poverty reduction and job creation. But the money is not there yet, yeah? On capacity building, it's not there. Do we have a strategy? So part of it, to get the political message so we get the funding, is to get these other two guys collaborating with me.
Running out of time. The speakers actually will be here after 2 o'clock in the executive conference room. So I would suggest you engage more active dialogue over there, more detailed dialogue. I think we really have to wrap this up to keep our good tradition that we're finishing on time. I got at least 3 messages here. One is must. So the agribusiness is a must for job creation, for wealth creation, for poverty reduction, for achieving MDG. I mean, this is a no-brainer. We know the importance. We don't need to repeat thousands and thousands of studies to show the importance of agribusiness. Now, opportunities. African economy is growing 6% per year, 5%, 6% per year. African is urbanized, although it's very much faster than its industrialization. But this creates opportunity for agribusiness. And emerging economies, China and India, are investing in Africa, are demanding agricultural products from Africa. It's another great, great opportunity. Do not just look at the European and the US markets. The emerging economy markets are very important, and also as an investor. Now, the third message I hear clearly is how. I think we don't have many answers here. So how question. For example, the land issues, land tenure, and land grabbing issues, or land investment. Maybe we shouldn't put that as a grab, as an investment. And personally, I do see a win-win opportunity. So the investors can bring technologies, markets, knowledge into Africa. It's one win. Another win is from where the investors will also benefit from that, obviously. But we do have to make sure that we have good code of conduct. My first proposal is to make all these transactions transparent. Any large land investment should be registered, just like in Australia, right, in your paper. So we got to register all these large land deals somewhere in your website. Today is very easy, not very fancy. 3 or 5 questions. How big is the investment? How many acres are involved? Who is investing? In which region? So make it transparent. This is the first step. And I propose in many places. This is only one place I try to propose. So land issue is a big one. Then research and development. In the past, we have very much focused on crop breeding, on productivity issues, but not so much on processing side, post-harvest technology side. And I see that can really bring a great opportunity and high return. Nutrition, so I think they have not dealt with your question adequately. I have a passion on that. So how can we really actually use the whole supply chain, integrate nutrition to every part of the chain, from the production, even from the seeds production, the use of inputs like fertilizer, pesticides, the production, marketing process, make sure that all the nutrition should be integrated there. one hand is the value of the nutrition should be reflected in pricing. On the other hand, if it is not reflected in pricing, then public policy is needed to correct that market failure. So I think we do need to pay to nutrition and health, not just nutrition. I should add another one, safety. So safety, to save nutritious and healthy food from your agribusiness firms, from the supply chain. The competition or potential trade-off between increased productivity and agribusiness development is a good question. We know that increasing productivity is a must, but it's not sufficient. And once the production has increased, then you have to move them to market to add value there. So what is the trade-off? And what are the priorities of your investment? Investment in terms of promoting productivity or promoting value chain, processing, agribusiness. So you need analysis. So all these questions need research support. I think you mentioned about your partnership with FAO IFPRI. I really strongly argue that you also should build a strong partnership with IFPRI. Well, happy. I'm glad. I also, as a Chinese, I'm also glad to hear the money. So he said, wow, we actually provide money for IFPRI in doing this, doing that. I think the partnership with the intellectual inputs plus money, all this come together, the good things will happen. Okay, thank you very much. So let's give them applause.